Україно, рідна земля мати, Господь, Отець наш Небесний, благословіть.
Russia is burning. Whether it's oil terminals on the Baltic and the Black Seas, factories in far-flung Siberia, or military bases in Crimea, it seems almost every day something bursts into flames in Putin's backyard. And Ukraine is thought to be the one behind it. That's nothing new for Kiev, whose troops have been destroying airfields, ammo dumps and fuel depots within Russia since the start of the war. But what is new are the types of targets the Ukrainians are taking out, the ways they are hitting them, and the effect that is having on Russia's war machine. Taken together, it all hints at a new strategy that will help Ukraine win a long war with Russia after its attempt at a quick victory fell flat. Here, we examine exactly what that strategy is, how it is supposed to work, and why Western help will be crucial in pulling it off. Zelensky warned Putin this would happen. All the way back in October last year, he said that if Russia waged another bombing campaign on Ukraine's cities this winter, then Ukraine would hit back. The Russian campaign began in earnest on December the 29th, when Moscow unleashed its single largest salvo of drones and missiles on Ukraine since the first day of the war. Just a few days later, Ukraine struck back. A fire at an electrical substation outside Moscow plunged 3 districts of the capital into darkness. Water pipes also burst, leaving people freezing in their homes. The plague of accidents soon spread to the cities of Omsk and Novosibirsk, deep in Siberia, which were left without heating as temperatures fell below -20 Celsius. But it did not stop there. Soon after, attacks began on critical infrastructure, including oil refineries, upon which Putin's economy relies. To date, 3 refineries have been blown up or set on fire, including 2 which were hit by long-range Ukrainian drones. One of those, the Ust-Lunga refinery near St. Petersburg, is almost 600 miles from Ukraine, which is a seriously long distance for a drone to fly undetected. Railways and factories have also been blown up or burned down. At the same time, the Ukrainians have stepped up their campaign against Crimea. Following on from successful attacks last year that saw a ship and submarine sunk in the port of Sevastopol, the Black Sea Fleet headquarters blown up, and commandos landed on the peninsula, Ukraine struck another docked ship. The Boxing Day attack sunk a large transport ship called the Novocherkassk, and several days later was followed up with another strike on a Russian command post. Kiev did not say exactly who or what it was targeting at the HQ, but wild rumours began to fly that General Gerasimov, commander of the Russian military, was there at the time. So, why is this also important? Because it looks like the start of a new Ukrainian strategy to win the war, even if its armies can't advance on the battlefield. Until now, Ukraine's victory plan had been to push Russia's army back across the border by liberating its territories one by one. The liberation would start with those closest to the front, no matter how strategically important they were or weren't, before ending up at Crimea. This was the thinking behind the summer counteroffensive, which ultimately failed and robbed Kiev of the hope of a quick victory. Now locked into a long war with Russia, Ukraine is digging in and refocusing. Liberation of territory is no longer the main goal. Hitting Russia where it hurts most comes first. That's because Ukraine knows that victory in a long war depends on 2 things above all else: the will of people to keep fighting and the ability of the country to provide weapons for them to fight with. And that's where these drone, missile and sabotage attacks come in. Crimea is Putin's weak spot. When he seized it back in 2014, it provided him with a huge popularity boost, which almost certainly inspired his full-scale invasion in 2022. Fear of losing Crimea, therefore, is a huge motivating factor for him. By bombing and raiding it, Ukraine hopes to break his will for war and force him to negotiate on their terms. Sabotage attacks on Russian heating and power systems are designed to have a similar effect, but on the Russian people. Unlike democratic Ukraine, Putin doesn't need his people to support the war, but he does need their passive acceptance. That means keeping the consequences of the fighting as far away from them as possible. Turning off the lights and the heating brings the reality of the war right to their doorsteps, with the aim of turning passive acceptance into active resistance. Meanwhile, bombing oil refineries aims to cut off a key source of Putin's war funding, and destroying factories is supposed to stop Russia producing more weapons for the front. The tactic has worked for Ukraine elsewhere. In the Black Sea, it has managed to drive Russia's formidable fleet away from its coast using nothing more than a few dozen boat drones. If it can repeat the same tactic on land and in the skies, Kiev may reasonably hope to weaken the Russian army to the point where its own troops can start to advance once more. But all the while Ukraine is turning the screw on Russia, the Russians are doing exactly the same to Ukraine. The will of the Ukrainians to keep fighting is unshakable. Putin learned that for himself last winter, when missile salvos against power plants and heating systems designed to break their spirit came to nothing. But Ukraine's ability to provide weapons for its soldiers is hanging by a thread which the Kremlin is trying to cut. This winter, Putin's missiles have not been directed at Ukrainian power plants, but at its weapons factories instead. And he's trying with all his might to stop more Western military aid getting to Kiev by sowing discord in the EU and the US. $60 billion in aid is currently being held up in Washington by MAGA Republicans, whilst Brussels had to play hardball with Hungary's Viktor Orban in order to get its own $50 billion package passed. Meanwhile, another $300 billion in Russian funds is sitting in a Brussels counting house amid dithering over seizing it and sending it to Ukraine. If that vital funding can be stopped, or at least delayed long enough to make it useless, then all the willpower in the world won't matter. Ukraine's troops will run out of ammo. Russia's armies will be on the march once more. Putin will earn himself a sought-after victory, and the West will suffer a blow from which it will struggle to recover. But it doesn't have to end like that. Military aid must be unblocked, and Russia's foreign assets handed over, giving Kiev a $400 billion war chest with which to hold its front line, paid for mostly out of Putin's pocket. Then Kiev must be given more long-range missiles with which to carry out the strikes that will grind down the will and the ability of Russia to fight. That does not just mean more British Storm Shadows and French Scout missiles, but German Taurus and American ATACMS as well. If both of those things can be done, and quickly, then there is a viable path to a Ukrainian victory, even if it will take longer than everybody hoped. Ukraine's new strategy shows it has the skill and ingenuity to win a long war with Russia, if only its allies will give it the means.